Let's now talk about a very important subject, which is client components and server components in Next.js. So Next.js is basically a full stack framework. It's different from React, which is just a front-end framework. And by that, you can have your server and your client in one place. And this implies having the choice between a client and a server component. So a client component is a component that gets rendered by your browser, right? And a server component is a component that gets sent to your browser. So it's like what you would have in a full stack application. Let's say the MERN stack, where you have the server sending you, let's say, an HTML file, right? After it has processed data or something. Okay. So if, let's say, we want to use or we want to add interactivity to a component, we cannot do it as is. What I mean by that is, let's try to add here a button that says click me here. And this button, once we click this button, it's going to fire a function. And this function says here, handle click. Okay. So this function is just going to put an alert here, and it says hello world. And we have a handle click here. Okay. So this, if we try it, it won't work. Let me actually show you. Let's try to render this up. So we'll have an error, and it says that event handlers cannot be passed to client component props. Okay. So if you need interactivity, consider converting path of this to a client component. So by default, every component we create in Next.js is a server component. Okay, so we have to convert it into a client component to add interactivity to our, let's say, to our component here. So it's pretty simple. We just have to add this use client at the top of every or at the top of any component you want to use. And it's going now to behave as just a client component. So let's just try now. And we see this click me button, that when we click this button, so we have this hello world alert. Okay. So when are we going to use the client component, you might ask? We will use it whenever we want to add interactivity to our site, or when we want to, let's say, use the state or use any hook in React. And we will use by default the server component if we don't want to add interactivity or use any hook in our app. Okay, so we have this actually summarized by Next.js, and it's this table that we have here. So we use server component by default whenever we want to fetch data, access backend resources, okay, keep sensitive information, or keep large dependency on the server. So we know that the client side can be pretty huge when we have large applications, and this can definitely reduce your app performance. Okay, so whenever we don't know what to do by default, just use the server component. And if you want to add, let's say, interactivity as it says, that is said here, or you use any life cycle effects like the use state, use reducer, use effect, or you want to just use the browser only APIs, okay, any API that belongs to the browser, you can use the client component, okay, or any other custom hook that you create. All right. So back to our app, you can have the client component, and let's say you can have another component that's not a client component. For example, I can have here, instead of having the button here, I know that I'm only going to use this button once, meaning I can isolate this button into its own component, so I don't make this home component a client component just for this button. Okay, so let's, for example, here add a components folder, and within this components folder we can have a button. Okay, button.js or tsx as we are using TypeScript, and we use our button here, and let's just copy everything. Okay, this is actually best practice, so we don't make this whole component. Imagine it was like a very big component, so you would have to just convert this whole component into a client component, and this takes definitely more space, right, for your application. So you would just prefer to isolate any interactivity in its own component, so we reduce the bundle size. So let's just go back to the button, and inside of this we can return the button. Okay, and now we can use the client here. So use client, and we'll go back to our page and remove this use client so that it stays a server component. Now let's add the button like this, right? So this is best practice. So now we have a hybrid component because it's a server component that renders a client component. So we have the same result, right? But our bundle size, we have like a smaller bundle size, and our app is more performant. So that's it. You can go back to the Next.js and read about this, but it's very important and it will come often when you are going to build your application with Next.js.